loved it. I'll send you a copy. Bam! Bitch went down.
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking Russian mad scientists, we're talking crises of faith, and we're talking about the restoration of heterosexual romance. I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking Amanda Peet falling to her death down an elevator shaft.
Oh my goodness. It's disappointing every single time I watch this movie because this movie needs more Amanda Peet, not less.
Wait, how many times have you seen this movie?
This is second or third time.
Okay, because you made it sound like you've seen it a bunch of times. I've also seen it only twice.
I watch it every year religiously on the anniversary of the date that she falls down that shaft.
It's really upsetting, and I mean, she has nothing to do in this movie, but I really, really like Amanda Peet, and I feel like people always underestimate her because she did a lot of like shitty romantic comedies or like weird like Saving Silverman and Whipped type movies in the early 2000s.
Yeah, she's this week's Kirsten Dunst.
Yes, exactly. But I think she's like whatever. She's doing fine now, but yeah, people just don't like her that much, and I don't get it.
It's okay. She's married to one of the guys who does Game of Thrones, so she's like rolling in the money. Like
I found that out today, and I was like, "What?"
Yeah, it's a little bit crazy, but all of that does not matter because Trace, this is our 50th fucking episode.
It is our 50th fucking episode, and we are talking the X-Files. I want to believe everybody.
Right, yeah.
So, wait, X-Files. I want to believe, not X-Files. I want to believe everybody. Sorry, that was a lost in translation.
X-Files. I want to believe everybody.
We can talk about the music choices that are featured in the closing credits of this movie with a club remix of the X-Files theme.
I mean, the 90s. Oh, wait, no, this movie's not from the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. But before we even get to the discussion of the episode, everybody, we do have a very special guest. I teased him last week, but I didn't tell you who he was. You may know him from some of his writing on Dread Central and or Bloody Disgusting. He's helped me cover some various film festivals here in Austin. Please welcome my husband, Andrew, better known to everyone as Ari Drew.
Woo-hoo. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I mean, it was really hard to squeeze you in, but we made it happen.
Wow. We're already going into the sexy marital places, eh?
Here we go, okay.
I mean, the only reason that we have invited you on here is because the fans want to know all of the dirt.
They will get some dirt, I guess, just by virtue of me being here in the same next to Trace and having heard this enough to know what it's about, so and know how you guys talk to each other.
No, for a record, one time Andrew was like, I don't really listen to that much because I heard you on one episode and it was really crass and I just didn't want to hear that, and I was like, okay. You're
making me sound like a prude, and I'm not at all a prude.
No, he's not a prude. So yeah, welcome on the show, Ari. We are happy to have you. I'm particularly happy to have you, and I'm actually, okay. We mentioned this last week too, but this 50th episode, now we were always going to have you on the 50th episode, but we weren't. We didn't plan this episode.
No, we didn't plan anything this year.
In hindsight, we should have picked a more momentous film, I guess, for the 50th episode, but no, we're watching this movie
which is a movie.
It's a movie, but it's considered, it's considered the lesser of the X-Files movies, and also just not a good movie in general.
Sadly, yeah.
I will say, I think this movie's fine. I don't hate it like so many other people do, but that might be because I have seen maybe 2 episodes of this show.
Which is why we have your better half on.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's what I was getting to that.
Yeah, so actually, I had completely forgotten that you said that I was going to be on the 50th episode, so now I feel very anxious and horrified to be doing this, so...
No.
Just feel horrified to be here regardless of which episode you were going to be on.
This is true.
So, yeah, but Ari, you have watched the whole series. So I think you watched it, over the past, 4 years you went through the whole series?
It was probably, I think probably 4 or 5 years ago. It took me a year and a half, and I watched the whole series up to that point. So I actually I think I told you this, Joe, but I still haven't watched season 11. Because I don't want to end. I know a little bit about what happens, but I don't want it to end because I've really enjoyed it, and I actually really liked season 10, which I know some people were not into that. So again, yeah, I have some views on this movie that are a little bit different, I guess now, because the first time I watched it, it was coming right off of the show. And so I really fucking hated it. I thought that it was the least X-Files-y movie they could have made.
Well, and for a lot of people, this seemed like it was going to be the end of the franchise, right? Like, we were never going to see Mulder and Scully again, and this is how Chris Carter decided to wrap things up.
Well, no, here's the thing. I don't know much about this fucker Chris Carter, but I will tell you, in the research that I did, so he did this fully expecting to get a third movie out, because he did this as a standalone episode, which, to my knowledge, and again, y'all can correct me if you have anything to that, because Joe, you've seen the whole show too, right?
I stopped, I think, the year after Mulder left. So I think I've seen up to season 8, and then I watched the finale. So there's 9 seasons, and then this movie, and then I think there's actually 2 short seasons that have aired on Fox.
It's like 6 episodes and 10.
Yes. And then the first movie, though, takes place between seasons 5 and 6.
Sounds about right.
That sounds right, yeah.
All I know was that I read a lot about how the show was filming in Vancouver for the first 4 or 5 seasons, and then they moved to LA to film
because of David Duchovny.
Right, but then the aesthetic of the show totally changed and lost a lot of the doom and gloom, I guess, and it was all sunny and shit because it was LA.
Yeah, people felt that a lot. It's something that I went into it having heard all these things, and so I was really anticipating when I might drop out or when I might start or stop enjoying it as much. And I never really got to a point where I was like, oh, I really hate this. I hate what they've done to this. There are points when I'm like, okay, let's wrap this shit up. But I'm someone who, I don't know. I gave it a fair chance, and I actually really do even enjoy the later seasons where David Duchovny's gone, just because I really like Robert Patrick and Annabeth Gish.
Well, they are nowhere to be seen in this movie.
They are not.
No.
No.
Well,
they got rid of them real fast.
Yeah, they were... I think in hindsight, people feel like they kind of inherited a bad deal, but they're actually pretty good. It's just, if you've got the chance to come back and make a movie, you're not going to populate it with those people. Although, in hindsight, again, it would have made sense to have just had those two instead of Amanda Peet and Exhibit in this movie.
That's
which is the most random fucking casting ever.
Well, okay, we'll get into that when we get into our plot, because I will say that, the whole reason that Carter did the movie like this is because he wanted to bring in new viewers that hadn't seen the show before. He wanted to make it accessible, so that's why he didn't do a mythology show. And again, to my knowledge, the show does both mythology-heavy episodes about the conspiracy, and I have no idea what that's about. Mm-hmm. And they also do standard standalone episodes about various themes or monsters of the week and whatnot, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like Buffy in that way, but it never wrapped up at the end of a single season. It's like an ongoing, always evolving mythology. And then a lot of people, I think, prefer the standalone episodes because they're just easier. The mythology gets real murky.
It's extremely, extremely convoluted. The fact that you don't really know what they are, what it's all about, Trace, is not that different from someone who's watched the show, because it's at a point it gets extremely convoluted and confusing because you only get mythology episodes every few episodes, or even sometimes it's even the sweeps episodes are the only mythology episodes.
Yeah.
I remember seeing the first movie in theaters. I mean, that came out in 1998, so I would have been 9 years old. But I remember I walked out of there not even knowing what the X-Files were.
Oh yeah, you're just is it bees and people with black eyes? Maybe.
I was so confused, and honestly, to this day, I don't know what the X-Files are, and you don't need to tell me. It's totally fine.
I mean, maybe we'll tell you in the next hour.
Maybe. So the fan backlash to this movie. So yeah, I mean, Carter was super cocky, and he was like, "Okay, we're gonna make this standalone, bring in new viewers." I almost said new listeners, and then we're gonna make a third movie that's gonna go back to the mythology. And I was like, "All right." And maybe had this been made right after the show went off the air, that would have made sense. But since we have, well, all right, let's go with that. So this film was released on July 25th, 2008, a week after The Dark Knight and Mamma Mia, I might add. That's not important for y'all, but it's important for me.
It actually does. The Dark Knight part actually is semi-important because of at least David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson, how they have kind of credited this movie's underperformance to the fact that it came out so soon after The Dark Knight.
Which makes no sense.
No, this movie also opened at number 4 in the box office, below The Dark Knight, Step Brothers in its first weekend, and Mamma Mia in its second weekend. Dark Knight also in its second weekend. But we'll get there in a minute. So this show went off the air, I think, in May 2002. So November of '01, they're like, cool, we're going to make a second movie. Chris Carter was going to collaborate with the writer of this film, Frank Spotnitz, who I think had worked on the show a lot before.
Yeah.
And he also co-wrote the first film. They were going to begin the film after the completion of season 9 with a projected release date in December of 2003. Needless to say, that did not happen.
Not exactly.
April of '02, so this is like right before the series goes off the air. Carter's like, yeah, I still want to do a sequel. We're going to write the script over the summer after the show ends and begin production in the spring and summer of '03 for a 2004 release. Again, didn't happen. Also that summer, though, the director of the first film, Rob Bowman, says, oh, I'm totally want to direct the sequel. Again, didn't happen.
No. Are we sensing a trend?
I don't really know what was going on here. And so, like, 2 years pass, April of '04, David Duchovny is like, yeah, I'm waiting for the production to begin. Chris Carter already signed off on the premise. Okay. In November of '04, Carter's like, yeah, the project's in the negotiation stage, but because it's a sequel, there are peculiar and specific kinds of negotiations that are holding us up.
AKA money.
That has to be the case, right? I mean, basically, Spotnitz ended up blaming the delay on the legal issues between Chris Carter and 20th Century Fox. So it wasn't until like late '07 when they officially announced that the film was going to happen, and then they keep the plot details super secret, super under wraps.
Yeah, no one had any idea what this film was about. Nobody knew if anybody was coming back apart from the two leads.
So I don't remember the marketing for this movie, like what it was handled. I didn't even watch the trailer. I should have watched the trailer beforehand. But nevertheless, you think because of that, don't you think that the turnout for the opening weekend, which by the way, this movie made $10 million opening weekend in 2008, compared to the first film, which made $30 million in 1998 on its opening weekend.
Bear in mind that first movie was like in between seasons of the show. And
right.
Because it tied into the mythology, it was like, you can't keep watching the show if you haven't seen this movie.
Yeah.
Was the first movie supposed to be a series finale, or was it always just going to be, oh, we're just going to do it in between seasons?
It's just in between.
Yeah, it doesn't even end in a very, like, finale-y way, really. It kind of leaves more questions than answers.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting, too, considering the subject matter of this movie, and we'll get into it in the plot summary, but how potentially problematic it is. Like, even the basic premise is just like, I'm surprised that this movie got a wide release, given what is involved in the plot of this movie.
I think it's based entirely just on the name recognition. Like, if this had been some random movie about FBI agents looking for a missing agent,
which it could be.
Which it could be. This could be an updated version of Silence of the Lambs, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. That's what I kept saying that exactly last night. I was like, this is like Silence of the Lambs, maybe a little bit of Untraceable, too. Ari, you said 7 last night.
Yeah, I said 7 just because that's what I remember reading on one of the reviews, just about like how people saw it. Because initially when I saw it, I remember being I didn't know what the plot was. Like, I thought it was going to be just like something alien related, but maybe just not to the mythology. Mm-hmm. And so I was pretty shocked that it was about what it was about, and it was much more like a serial killery hunt type of movie.
It's like the most humdrum of boring, kind of bland, forgettable narratives, right? Like, people really thought this was going to be a sensationalistic return.
So I disagree that the narrative is boring. But again, coming in some ways,
in the context of the show, like the X-Files, even in the standalone episodes, like we're talking bugs that are released from ice and they like wrap people up in cocoons and feed on them. We've got like larvae that ingest, we've got men who live in sewers. Like, they didn't do routine serial killer narratives on the show.
No, and like they'd done a couple of serial killers before. There was one that I think was more normal, and it was the one who it got tied up in the storyline, which is the very long storyline that I've read continues in season 11 with Mulder's sister, which is basically the impetus for the whole show. And at a point when you're watching the show, you're just real fucking tired of hearing about Samantha. But they there was a really good serial killer episode where there was a killer who was kidnapping young girls or something, and so he led Mulder to believe that his sister was one of his victims, which I thought was a great. So that was probably the most like normal serial killer take that they did that I can remember. The other ones that they did were like the Tombs episodes, which is like there's like a serial killer who can squeeze through small spaces. There was like a multiple episodes of that. So I again, like with the serial killer arc, to me it wasn't once I got what it was, I was like, oh, they're doing like a standalone, one of their serial killer-y things. But I expected, I guess, a lot more from it in the execution.
Mm-hmm.
It was, yeah.
I think a lot of the build-up's really good. By the way, this is true. Whenever the picture of her popped up, I literally had to turn it to Ari and be like, who was that?
Who is that? What is that?
And then, of course, later in the movie, Scully's like, your sister's dead. Get over it. Oh my God, Mulder. I don't even know.
To be fair, that's what everyone was saying at that time. So that's, she was totally in the right there.
But I will say, I think that the lead up for this movie, at least the first like act or two, is really good. I think the third act is fine. But it's very anticlimactic. And this is a movie, and I know we've talked about ratings so much on this show, and we'll go into it more next month. But this is a plot and a movie that I really think would have benefited from an R rating. Like, it's a weird fucking plot, and I think they needed to lean into that and how fucking weird it was.
So you wanted, like, more batshit crazy. You wanted more blood and violence?
I mean, not necessarily blood and violence, but, like, I mean, we're talking about fucking psychic pedophiles, weird Frankenstein human head transplant things, like... The one moment that I was like, oh, that's interesting is like the head winking in the bucket of ice, or the head waking up in the bucket of ice. And I was like, I wish there was more things like that in this movie, but it's so dead set on like being about Scully's
religious crisis of faith.
Which is like such a long running theme in the show that it's not to say like, oh, it's been played out to death, but it's been done better so many other times in the show, I thought.
Yeah.
And like to kind of, it felt a little shoehorned in here to connect people with her again. Like, it's kind of like, look, it's Scully doing the Scully thing, and she's having a crisis of faith. And remember, don't you love that? You know, it kind of felt like that.
I mean, again, I know we're going to get to it in a minute, but like up until the ending where like, oh, the stem cells became like relevant to the Frankenstein plot, I was literally like,
why is this in here?
Yes. Like, what? This movie could be 90 minutes long, because it's almost as long as 3 episodes of the show. Almost.
Ugh, it's such a waste of opportunity when you put it that way.
But that's like
seriously.
You can take out that entire plot and make it work still, and at least make it look kind of a fun, interesting thriller. But then they throw in this boring stuff with Scully at the Catholic hospital. I don't give a shit. And then, of course, the way the movie ends. Well, okay, sorry. Before we get into the plot, I've already said the money, it made $10 million opening weekend. It went on to
make... But do you have production budget? Because when you were talking about how you wished it was a harder rating, I think your budget will give you some clarity as to why it's not.
Calm your tits, though. Okay, this is a budget of... No, this is a budget of $30 million, which... Even in 2008, which is 11 years ago, is a good amount of money for a movie. Like, again, when Blumhouse is making, like Halloween for $10 million, like, come on, you can do something with this. But, that being said, it is a noticeable decline from the budget of the first movie, which was $66 million in 1998 money.
Yeah, that one was, like, big. Like, you couldn't believe that they were spending that much money on a film.
Right now, I can't believe that. I cannot believe that movie got that much money.
Well, and I will say, too, I like that movie more, but even that movie, like, in the scope of the show, I would have been okay if it was like a couple of episodes. Like, it felt like that. So there was nothing that it did. I'm a huge X-Files fan, too, but there was nothing that it did that really kind of, like, merited an entire movie with that much budget. I guess there were a couple of shots that were a little, kind of a little, cool for the shows.
I remember the cold open with the kid falling in the pit and his eyes turns black. The X-Files and Buffy were the two shows as a kid that I wasn't allowed to watch. I mean, it was like this, The Simpsons, and Married with Children, and Buffy. Like, those are the shows I couldn't watch as a kid. And so when my parents were like, me as a 9-year-old, let's go see The X-Files because it's PG-13, I'm like, y'all are a bunch of fucking hypocrites, because what is something that's on TV worse than what I'm about to see in this movie? And for a 9-year-old, that movie's kind of scary, but I missed out on the phenomenon that was this show. Like, I didn't like talk to people that really liked it. Buffy, I did experience that with. I got to see, I know people who liked it. I didn't get that with this show, and I don't know. So that's why I never started it, because it was too daunting of a task. I mean,
it really was. And having recently decided to watch it a few years back, I did it because I wanted to catch up before the season 10 ended. And I remember kind of thinking, like, I'm going to fucking do this, like, now that they're doing this 10th season. So I know it's going to take a long time, but I'm going to do it. And it was really a huge undertaking. But even as a kid, like, I was a huge Buffy fan. I watched that all as it aired. But This show, I always just thought it was too slow. I always thought it was boring, but the opening theme used to freak me out a lot. So a part of me was a little bit like, oh, maybe I would like that. It seems creepy. So one of the few episodes I actually saw as a kid was about a supposed sea monster that's out in a lake in a town. And I was so excited about it. And then I watched it, and that was the only thing I ever saw. So I didn't know anything about the mythology. I just knew about this Big Blue, the sea monster that they were trying to find in this lake. And then I don't know if any of you, some listeners might remember this, but there were some X-Files novelizations that came out.
Oh, I'm sure there fucking were.
Oh, this show had everything.
But they were like, I think they were just made for kids. They were really short. So I bought them all. And the one that I read first was Squeeze, the one with the serial killer who can squeeze through bars and stuff. And his episodes are really creepy. So that was my only exposure to the show. I never saw the movies or anything when they came out. I never, really kept up with anything. But it was definitely a very daunting task, and even still is if anyone out there decides they want to tackle this one.
Because remember that we're talking about the beginning of the golden age of television. So we're talking television seasons with 22 to 24
That's
episodes.
why I never got... Hey, the Blu-ray box set of this fucking series, all 11 seasons, minus the movies I found out last night when we were about to watch this, is sitting on the fucking Blu-ray shelf out in my living room. And I'm like,
Who's got the time?
It's so... Well, Ari.
Well, yeah, I mean...
Hey, at the time, I definitely had some time to kill.
But you're talking about, like you're not going to breeze through that in, a couple of weeks. Like, you're
it was like a year and a half.
Multi-year, multi-month project.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, even my best friend who is a working musician and who, who works a lot of evenings and stuff like that and would put the show on when she was, doing creative stuff, it took her a long time to get through it as well. We were both kind of on the same... the same schedule for trying to finish at the same time.
So this movie, it went on to make $21 million domestically. So did not make its money back domestically. Compared again to the first film, $83.9 million.
Just still not that good.
Right. But it does have a worldwide gross of $68 million. Compared again to the first film's $189 million worldwide gross. And I think the international, because it made its money back, technically. And I think Chris Carter was banking on the international gross getting in the third film, which might have worked had the film been well received. Because we're looking at a 31% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, with an average of 4.79 out of 10, and a 32% from audiences. One of the rare times in our life where the critic and audience scores align. But here's the weird thing. Metacritic score of a 47 out of 100, and a user score of 63 out of 100. I mean, not a big difference. 63 is fine, but it's still considered good.
I do wonder if maybe that's just people coming around to it at the end of the day, kind of like you, Ari, where they went in with their eyes fully open as to what some of the potential pitfalls of this movie were, and they were like, okay, I know it's not going to be big. I know it's not going to have a dog in him. Whatever Annabeth Gish's character name
Reyes. Monica Reyes. Monica Reyes, who was in season 10 and 11, by the way. She comes back.
Yeah.
Doggett does not, sadly, but yeah.
What is Robert Patrick doing? What is he
he had scheduling conflicts. They were planning on writing him into season 11. So
and he's like, no one liked me. I'm not going to do it.
I loved him. He was so great in that. But anyway, we won't go there yet. I was very much
legitimately good.
Yeah, I was very much in love with him in those later seasons. I thought he was so charming.
Well, they do well to distinguish them from Mulder and Scully too. So
for sure, yeah. But no, you're right. I think because I saw this 2 years ago, and again, I was really pissed. I was like, "What the hell? This is so sad." But also, I had the knowledge then that they were going to be continuing this and doing it justice.
Well, so. that's kind of the thing, though. I think if you're a fan of the show, you've put together 9 years of effort into this show. And then 6 years later, this comes out and it's the end of the series. Mm-hmm. I get how that would be very frustrating and enraging for you.
Yeah, I went to see this on opening weekend with a friend of mine who is a hardcore X-Files fan. And he was so excited because the movie just kept getting delayed. It seemed like it was never going to happen. And then it finally comes out and he was gutted. Like, he fucking hated this movie so much. He didn't even want to talk about it as we were leaving the theater.
I mean, it's Ridley Scott syndrome from Alien Covenant. People kept saying shit, and it's like, why don't you just shut the fuck up until the movie is literally behind the camera?
Well, and the problem is that Chris Carter is like an egomaniac, so he has really kept control of this entire franchise, its entire duration. He loves to talk it up. He loves to talk a big game about himself, and then...
So, what's crazy is, hey, again, I don't know the X-Files, but I know Chris Carter, but I thought it's because he was like a famous director, or a famous something. And had done other things.
He's literally famous for this.
But this is his thing. To his credit, though, this whole universe exploded in such a huge way that people are still... you have like a hardcore fandom. You have a hardcore, like, even the spin-offs that none of them did well, really. I don't know. I think Millennium was maybe on the longest of the two other spin-offs.
It was 3 years compared to the Lone Gunman, which didn't even last a season.
Yeah, the Millennium, they did like a crossover, I think, to close out the Millennium storyline. They did it for one of the later seasons of the X-Files. But to his credit, like, I mean, again, those shows were never as successful, but I think at that point he had tapped into such like a niche market that he was only ever gonna have this very, maybe, you know, if you're comparing it to things like Star Wars or Star Trek or something, like, it was a smaller pool of fans. And so I don't know, maybe he also, though, very much overestimated how big that pool would still be, you know, years later.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces that I think contribute to the failure of this film, both like financially and also unfortunately creatively. But it's important not to discount the cultural worth of the X-Files as a property and just like the longevity. Like, this is a very, very important show to people, like to such an extent that when we revealed to our patrons that we were doing this, we immediately got an email from someone being like, I hope you'll be kind. The X-Files is very important to me.
I did not see that email. This
makes me feel even more nervous to be here right now.
Well, no. Okay, so like, this was a phenomenon. Like, this, because I liken it to, because I'm talking about the fan base. Okay, like, imagine the Buffy fan base, because again, like, these shows, they get their stuff. But Buffy also had a much smaller viewership than this show. Like, this show was not just a niche. It was mainstream. Like, people watched this show. And I'm trying to think, like, but with the failure of this movie, like, if Buffy had a movie come out, you know, it was a sequel to season 7 or whatever, or I guess maybe even now season 8 and 9 in the comics, like, whatever. And even if I had been told it was shit, or if it was...
You would go and see it.
I would absolutely go and see it. Because I love Buffy. And so it's fascinating to me that the fans of this show, even because obviously word of mouth was extremely negative because people were pissed, but like, even that, like, you're not morbidly curious to just go watch this movie to be the quote unquote series finale of the show that you put 9 years into and that you love so much.
Yeah. I don't know if it had just, like, it was too much downtime and people had moved on, or if they were thinking back to the first film and they thought, oh, you know, I don't want to try to get back into this mythology. Like, because they didn't really market it properly, I think there was a lot of confusion as to whether or not you needed to know the whole show. Because you have to remember, people dropped off as soon as David Duchovny skidded out.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too, is the fact that like this show was mainstream, but you have to think it was mainstream up until like halfway through. Because again, even towards the end of David Duchovny, there was some drop off that people, you know, and it was a slog to get through some of it.
See, that does not make me want to watch it. It doesn't make me want to start this show.
It's really one of those things too, like once you're committed though, it's, I mean, I'm sure. I was like, I have to do this. And it's, even some of the episodes, like they would just kind of be on and I would be like writing a paper or something, you know, it's like kind of, it became, because honestly too, with some of the Monster of the Week episodes, which there are more of those than not, you don't have to pay a ton of attention. A lot of times it's just kind of fun. And yeah, I'll talk about the humor in a little bit, because Trace, one thing you mentioned about like you wanted things to be a little wackier, crazier, go like just bizarre.
I mean, not funny. I didn't need
but the thing is that the show is known for being really humorous. Like
what?
The show does humor really, really well. There are some episodes that are purely humorous that are some of the best episodes.
There's some jokes in this movie that I was like, we're gonna go with that. All right. Well, on that note, maybe we should start with the plot summary. I mean, start. We're just going to do it.
I do want to contextualize one other thing that I think will be helpful for you, Trace, and other people who aren't as familiar with the show. The relationship between Mulder and Scully, particularly as the series aged and especially after David Duchovny left, became very, very important because it actually became romantic throughout
Yeah.
I think the first 2/3 of the series, it was like a will they, won't they flirtation kind of thing. And then when they fully committed to it and then David Duchovny left, it was kind of like, ugh, how are we going to handle this? All right, here we go. So the film opens with a pair of cross-cut scenes. A woman...
Wait, I like this.
Five words in, people. 5 words.
No, I know. But no, because I saw this movie when it came out. I saw it opening weekend. Again, not having ever seen an episode of the X-Files, just watching the first movie. And I actually like the opening of this movie. And I love that you don't, like, you think it's the same time, obviously, because that's the whole point of the intercutting of the scenes. But it's again, filmed like a horror movie. And it's just, I thought it was really cool. I thought it was a really cool idea.
Yeah, and it works well. They do it a couple of times, and it's helpful to keep at least the pacing going a little bit better. Like, it gives it some energy.
Oh, P.S. though, editor Richard A. Harris, who I was like, I don't know who that is, James Cameron buddy, because he has edited Terminator 2,
Ooh.
True Lies, and Titanic. And he did this and one other movie and has not edited anything since.
Weird.
Because I think the action is actually fairly well edited for the most part. I don't love the finale, but...
We'll get to it.
Yeah, I mean, he's also only able to work with whatever Chris Carter gave him, and Chris Carter has only ever directed The X-Files.
Yeah. Hey, do y'all think that was a mistake to let him direct this movie?
I don't think so. No, I mean, again, after that long, too, if he wasn't doing it or wasn't involved to that degree...
It might not have happened at all.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, again, maybe maybe it shouldn't have happened, but I don't know. I think maybe like fans would have liked that he directed it.
Yeah. I remember people feeling like, oh, the ship is being steered by the person in charge. Okay. So we've got a woman who is later identified as Special Agent Monica Bannon, who is a woman named Xantha Radley. I don't know.
She did not have her own Wikipedia page, so she is not quote unquote famous.
Cool. Okay. I literally debated.
Well, just for that, I hope she is listening, and I hope she is a horror queer patron. She withdraws her monthly patron donation.
No, Xantha, we need your money. Xantha, come back.
Just hoping you were like doing her movie.
Right. So she is attacked outside of her home at night, and we simultaneously see a...
Wait, sorry. I love the part though where she sees his breath. I thought that's really, it was a really effectively done scene where like she's in the garage and she's like, someone's here, and then she can see the breath coming from the side of the building.
I think it cues you too that she's not your average woman in distress. Like, she's got her wits about her. When she reaches for that gardening utensil, you're like, oh, a bitch is going to do some damage here.
Again, some R-rated damage, but it doesn't happen.
I mean, I kind of like what she manages to accomplish.
That's fine.
But
She scrapes them up all right.
Yeah. I mean, it's not often you see someone get like a gardening shear or a planter thing to the face. That's not bad.
Yeah, fine. I'll allow it.
All right. So we simultaneously see a daytime police search moving across a frozen lake as they discover a severed arm, thanks to psychic Father Joseph Patrick Chrisman, played by Billy Connolly. So cut to Dana Scully, Gillian Anderson, a goddess amongst humans. Although maybe not so much in this movie.
Yeah, she's great all the time.
Yeah. She's working at a religious hospital when she is approached by FBI agent Drummy, who, I'm not going to lie, I may have written dummy in my notes several times.
I did too.
Y'all are assholes.
No, hey, look, that's not a name.
Okay. I love your defense there.
It's too close to what we wrote.
Well,
you're just like, why of all the names would you go with something that sounds like dummy?
Because I think, you know what, there's probably someone that was on the crew or something
exactly.
That same, because that's actually something that they've done before. It's like Kim Manners.
No, they do it in this movie. They do it a lot.
Yeah. No, they've always done that. Get with the culture.
Clearly, I'm not with the culture. But no, so played by Exhibit, who is a rapper.
I don't know that he's active anymore though.
I don't think so. Yeah,
I don't know, but he was in 8 Mile and Triple X2 and Bad Lieutenant, the Nicolas Cage movie, and I was like, oh, he's got like a pretty, minus Triple X2, a pretty decent like film au revoir.
And yet he has shown up in absolutely zero of the Fast and the Furious movies.
Surprising, right?
Because isn't that where like all rappers eventually just end up now?
Oh, wait, but hold on, that's not a knock. Like, that's great.
No, that's called character progression. Or sorry, like movie star progression.
I know. Fucking Helen Mirren was in the last movie. I'm sorry, the second to last movie, because we got Hobbs and Shaw. Anyone can be in this. But yeah, Exhibit, go be in Fast and Furious. It's great.
Exactly. Okay, so he is in this movie, tragically given nothing to do.
Nothing to do.
But in this early scene, he is looking for Fox Mulder, David Duchovny, and Mulder is also no longer an FBI agent. So we meet up with both members of the X-Files, no longer part of the FBI. And Mulder, in fact, is actually a recluse who lives with Scully in isolation following the events of the television series, where he was brought up on, I quote, bogus charges that aim to discredit 10 years of work.
I have no idea what this was about. I just bought into it.
I mean, I could explain what happened, but
can you Spark Notes it?
Basically, he was accused of killing like a federal agent who actually was not a real person. It was a super soldier, which was like the main antagonist of the last season 9. And part of this whole conspiracy, basically with the government and making deals with the aliens and all that. So yeah, he basically defended himself, killed this man. Who was an agent, but that person was not an actual person. And Scully did like an illegal autopsy, and it proved like, look, this is not a human being. And
but they shut down the X-Files anyway, right?
Yeah, because it was like it was not a valid way. She didn't have clearance to get that, and then so basically he went off. They basically went into hiding, essentially.
I mean, that kind of stuff is happening, I think, every other season on the X-Files, too. So, in a way, it's kind of like a continuity thing where you're like, yeah, they were just constantly getting shut down. They
got shut down like 3 times, I think.
Y'all are selling this show so hard.
It is a good show. I love the show, even in all of its, convolutedness. Like, I really do. I was into all of this stuff, but some years out of having seen it, I don't remember a lot of the mythology arc, because it is extremely convoluted.
Well, and I think the fact that when you have a television show that goes on for nearly a decade, you're bound to repeat a couple of things here and there too.
Sure.
All right, so the pair of former agents are brought in to help find this missing Agent Bannon, and the woman in charge of the search is Agent Dakota Whitney, Amanda Peet.
Who deserves more in this movie. She has one Oscar-worthy moment, and that's sarcasm, but we'll get to it. I really like her, and I feel like she's wasted. That's it. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think one of the biggest problems with this film is that it gives some fairly meaty things for David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson to do, and then it basically strands everybody else in a couple of scenes and then just forgets about all of them. Like, Amanda Peet at least dies, so you know where she's gone. Because every other character, you're just like, oh, them? Yeah, they're just off screen. Well, we're never going to reference them again.
Exhibit's just, left away, right? Like, he doesn't even die. He's just, done.
Yeah, Scully basically calls him and says, hey, you fucker, are you going to help me look for my man? And he's like,
yeah.
No.
Call the police. This isn't an FBI matter.
Yes. Which I messaged that to Trace. I was like, whew, there's some choice dialogue in this movie. Okay. But at the current moment in our plot recap, Agent Whitney she brings him up to speed. Basically, this is all to do with the background of Father Joe. So how he's connected to the case and the peculiar fact that he is a convicted pedophile who, line of dialogue from the film, buggered 37 altar boys.
I love that.
I do too, but it's clearly because they couldn't say fuck.
Dana Scully would never have said fucked 37 altar boys.
I don't think she would have said buggered 37 altar boys either. This is...
Oh my god, she absolutely would have.
Uncharacteristically vulgar.
No, I do. I absolutely think she would have said that. I absolutely think she would have said that.
So, I won't lie. I forgot about this entire movie.
Yes, I feel like we've established that a couple times.
I had no memory of this movie.
Maybe even in the last 24 hours you've forgotten about it.
It might be possible. But no, I mean, I saw this in 2008 when it came out, fucking July 25th weekend, like opening weekend. Again, as a non-fan. So you're welcome, Chris Carter. But I forgot about this entire pedophile thing. And when that was revealed, I was just like, huh, that's a choice.
It's a choice. Yep. It's a very important choice. These, or at least in the treatise that I'm going to argue about why this film... Ugh.
So here's the thing, and maybe we'll get into it further when we get to the confrontation between Dana Scully and Father Joe. But obviously, pedophilia is wrong. Pedophilia is a terrible, terrible tragedy. But there's something to be studied there that I think people accepting the whole, like, not the whole, I'm sorry, that sounds like minimalist, but just like saying they need to be shut out, they need to be sequestered to a fucking apartment complex where pedophiles are kept. It's diminishing the studies that can be done from people who have pedophilia tendencies or something like that. And yes, it's terrible. Yes, it's awful. Yes, it's wrong. It's a horrible fucking crime. And possibly the biggest taboo we have in America, at least. But the way the movie handles this particular character is questionable. Like, I don't know how I feel about it.
Like, because it wants you, it's trying to get you to sympathize with him or to be, like, you know, appreciate him in some way.
I don't want to say asking to sympathize is wrong, because I think...
Well, I think there's efforts that are made to indicate that he is not just simplistically a pedophile, that he also has other characteristics, and there's efforts made to say this isn't something where he's flat out just, yeah, I don't even know.
Well, no, and when he talks about, and I guess we'll get there, but when he talks about, I was made, you know, I didn't ask for these desires and all of that, like, that was one of the things that I think, again, like this, in this, I guess, like, for me, it just, X-Files, the second movie, years after this series ended, was not the vehicle for this conversation to be had.
No, not at all.
I think yeah. I do think there's something to be said for, like, the nuance of an argument of, I mean, when you talk about anyone who's convicted of a heinous crime and the idea of rehabilitation and the idea of reparations or rejoining society, like, that is a valid discussion to be had. And I think that this show was biting off a little more than it could chew by trying to have it in this regard, because really, like, it just was a lot for this type of movie.
Well, you know what? You cut out the fucking stem cell research kid plotline. You added more screen time for this discussion.
But here's the thing, Trace. The whole reason that this is in here is because it's a commentary on what's happening with Dana in her personal life.
Right.
Because that's why she gets so angry at him, right? Because everything to do with the way that she's feeling about this sick boy and the feeling that he has been given a bad hand is reflected in the fact that here's a man who has been actively harming 37 children and is still, like, out here helping the police, and he's walking free.
But even when they, and we'll get to it, but when they get to their confrontation, she loses that confrontation.
I don't know that I would say that. What makes you think that she loses it?
I just feel like he tells her off in a way that the film's like, see,
that's the thing. I think that it's what he was trying to do was kind of like throw some nuance out there that, like, this is not necessarily a black and white thing in this case. Like, where the fact that this person's, you know, done really fucking terrible things, he discounts anything good he could ever offer the world, which is kind of what it's suggesting by having him save the day, essentially, because he does, like, everything that he, you know, that basically everything he did is what ultimately leads to Mulder being saved at the end, Mulder being saved, and then kind of the resolution. So it's definitely, I just really, like, I know that X-Files has handled some stuff with respect to religion before and grief, and this was just, I just don't feel it was a well-suited, you know, kind of space for this discussion because of how it's handled, and ultimately handled in a way that's more problematic than I recall it being handled.
Yeah.
Joe, not necessarily in the way that you might find it, maybe partially, but not fully in the way that we can talk about that in a second, but yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a stereotypical pedophile Catholic priest. And I guess, like, coming, 5 years after South Park lampooned it, you know, with the giant spider monster, it's just very much like, we're doing this? Like, I mean, And I get it. There is a conversation to be had there, but the movie doesn't devote enough screen time to it to like make it a worthwhile addition or component of this film.
Well, and I think part of the problem, too, is that the scant amount of screen time that's devoted to some of the more problematic aspects, specifically pertaining to queerness and pedophilia and violence and murder and all these other things, because there isn't more depth or analysis in this film, because we're so busy focusing on the relationship between Mulder and Scully, which is arguably what fans want, but because we're not diving into these really meaty things that are not being handled as well as they can, unfortunately, I think some of the messaging comes across as like, oh, pedophilia begets homosexuality, which begets homicide and body mutilation.
That's the biggest issue I have with it is that it kind of is that I mean, I do research, so this is like something in the field that's been like, you're fighting against this idea that people have in the general public, like, oh, people who are gay or queer or whatever are pedophiles, number one. Number two, if they aren't pedophiles, it's because they were sexually abused, and that's why they became that way.
Well, maybe let's come back then, and we'll continue on. We can touch on some of that.
It's going to be a long conversation no matter what, like when we get to it. But yeah, let's continue. Then we'll jump in there.
Okay. So Scully is skeptical of Father Joe, and part of this is because of her faith, but also because she doesn't consider herself an FBI agent. So she's not really interested in partaking in this.
And she's always been super Catholic, like very like devoutly Catholic.
Yeah. Always. It's an integral part of her career.
Is she like homophobic? Is that like a thing?
No. She's always presented as a rational skeptic.
She's a scientist. I mean, she's a doctor, so she's always been like, where's the evidence? Where's like, the tangible evidence?
And Mulder's been the more like theoretical one that's like...
Mulder's like the crackpot. He's like the one who's like, we can't prove everything just because we can't see it. Like, he's thinking outside the box. Yeah.
He's almost more the conspiracy theorist.
And listeners, I apologize. Like, if you're X-Files fans, I'm sure I'm coming across like an idiot right now. But that being said...
but there's also lots of people who are probably in your shoes and have never seen the show or know it only by conversation or pop culture savvy.
Well, hopefully they're still listening to this episode.
50th episode.
Thanks for the 3 listeners who have made it to this point.
Yeah,
yes. Right. Well, we're doing better than the one who listened to last week, right? So Mulder, Drummy, and Whitney take Father Joe to the Virginian crime scene where he correctly identifies that there were 2 perps and they drove a truck to steal this woman away. And then he begins crying tears of blood. So we're bringing all of those kinds of connotations of... like a religious hysteric into this idea that he is getting visions and he is touched in that way. So back in the hospital, Scully has grown attached to Christian, the young boy who is suffering from Santoff disease, which is an incurable disease. And she's going to tearfully insist that she's got to treat this kid because everything in her life depends on being able to like heal this sick child.
This entire subplot, I get why it's included, again, considering what happens at the end, but it is so boring.
You just don't care about children, the lives of children.
Well, that's not untrue.
Wait. None of us do. None of us care about the lives of children.
No, I care about the lives of children dearly. And actually, I don't want to have them. I don't want them running around our space.
We have enough dogs for that.
I was going to say, those fur babies are children of their own.
No, they are. I'm sorry. I don't dislike children. I just don't, I don't want any.
Well, also this thing too, like, I guess like this subplot did not necessarily bother me. It felt like something that was lifted from a few episodes of the show and just put in to make it feel like the show.
Maybe, but as a standalone, like, again, someone coming in out of nowhere, it feels so superfluous until the reveal at the end, which even then, I feel like they could have abbreviated it.
Yeah, I'm kind of coming down on both sides because you can absolutely see why it's in there and how it's contributing to Scully's dilemma. But at the same time, considering where this film is taking shortcuts, there's so often where I'm just like, We don't even know anything about this kid. Like, I don't know if I really care about Scully's struggles with her boss. And all right, so after being scouted at the pool, Cheryl Cunningham, Nikki Acox,
who is not only the lead in Jeepers Creepers 2, but also the lead in the direct-to-video sequel Joyride 2.
So her career has also not been excessive.
No, but I actually think she's pretty good in this movie and in Jeepers Creepers 2.
Yeah, I mean, she does what she can. She's basically just a woman who gets locked in a cage for most of the film.
She's who's the woman in Silence of the Lambs? It's who's on Grey's Anatomy, who was fired. Like she's like a Brooke Smith. Yeah, she's like the Brooke Smith of this movie, just sitting in a crate.
I mean, I believe she didn't want to be in that crate, so I thought she did a good job.
Well, it's honestly, the weird thing to me, though, is when the guy runs her off the road, and, I'm sorry, Callum Keith Rennie, famed Canadian Callum Keith Rennie, runs her off the road, and then, like, she crashes, and he comes up to her, and she's like, oh, thank God, call help. And it's like, bitch, this guy just ran you off the fucking road.
I don't know that she knew that it was the guy.
No,
though.
I think she thought he was just a guy.
Like some other guy.
And pulled over. But no, it's actually Yanka.
Actually, though, but doesn't she say something like, I didn't see you, or didn't mean to, like, apologize for, like,
well, no, because before
trying to pass him?
No, before she gets run off the road, she's like, what the fuck? Like, I mean, she doesn't say that because it's PG-13, but she's very much like, what are you doing? Because he, like, knocks her once, and then he knocks her again.
No, but she just sees a snowplow. I don't think she knows who was driving it.
That was a snowplow? That was a truck with a thing in front of it.
I mean, it can be one and the other.
A truck with a thing in front of it.
Can we talk about how Trace is talking about things he's probably never seen in real life, having lived in Texas?
I don't think I've seen one, actually. We don't like,
isn't there a Liam Neeson movie where, like, his daughter gets abducted in one or something?
I've seen a snowplow, but I grew up in, like, North Texas, so there's snow there.
It was a very ineffective snowplow, I'm just saying.
Well, I mean, it knocked her ass off the road, so it did something.
Well, yeah, but it wasn't plowing snow, it was just not sideballing her.
Well, there is a curious, like, I'm not exactly sure why he has a truck with a plow on it, considering that he transports organs. He doesn't clear streets. It was a very unusual, like, why does he need a plow on this truck? Is that just, like, they rented it and that was the vehicle that they were like, yeah, this gives it personality? I don't know. Not important.
I guess I never thought about that. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's because of how they were burying the bodies. The body parts.
Yeah.
Speaking of, Joe, continue your plot summary.
Okay. So Scully reveals that there were traces of animal tranquilizer in the arm that they discovered at the beginning of the film.
Which they mention at least 5 times, by the way.
Yeah. Animal tranquilizer.
Important.
Pay attention. It's going to be important. Not really.
Yeah.
So then they get a call from Whitney, calling them to the scene of another crime, or rather, Father Joe has identified another place for them to dig. So Scully accuses Mulder of trying to save his sister, and she goes in real hard on him.
Real hard? After getting him out of, like, hiding to do this shit.
Okay, to be fair, she's been dealing with this shit with his sister for over 10 years at this point, or however
That was
long.
kind of my thing, though, too, is, like, so she knew where he's been since the end of the show, because, like, this movie takes place, obviously, like, what, 5 years after the show, you know?
Yeah, I actually don't know how much time it's meant to have passed.
But she knows where he's been. And they're also supposedly fucking on and off, maybe?
No, yeah, they're like a full-fledged couple.
But she doesn't live with him.
Actually, no, the way that they interact, it feels like they haven't seen each other in a little while.
That's what I'm saying. Like, when she goes to get him, it's very much not like, hey, we've been seeing each other for a while. We just fuck every 6 months.
You're really, like, diminishing the beauty of their relationship, and I will not stand for it. Like, they don't... This is the romance of a time, of a generation.
Chris Carter wants this to be a standalone movie. He has to deal with standalone viewers coming in to analyze this movie.
Oh Jesus Christ.
You're such a dick.
Analyze their relationship.
Yes, we know. You want to analyze their relationship.
Is it an analysis of all you're just doing is saying that they're just fucking all the time? Is that the extent of your analysis?
I mean, Ari, this is what we do every week.
Oh, I know.
Minus her, like, your stubbornness is why I love you comment. There's nothing here to believe. Like,
oh my God. Trace, you're an idiot.
Stop talking.
Just stop. Shut your mouth, please.
The whole thing about this film is that she has been so concerned about his withdrawal from basically everything, that she encourages him to get involved in this and then immediately regrets it. Like, there is nothing that has resonated so strongly in an adult relationship than this idea that you're like, I'm desperately concerned about you, and also, oh fuck, I just did something that I'm totally gonna regret later on. Because he just goes off on this, right? Like, he gets completely obsessed, and then she spends the rest of the movie being like, I shouldn't have done this because now I can't pull you back from the edge, and I don't think I can be with you anymore. Like, that's the only part of this movie that works.
Yeah, I love that. And also because it is very much an extension of like their arcs in the show, because the thing with his sister too, like that storyline did technically get some resolution in like season 7, like definitive resolution per se. So
yeah,
it's not like, but it's the idea of him being so obsessed over and over again of like wishing things had been different.
Yeah, which is why he's like, no, I know my sister's dead. And she's not actually talking about his sister per se. She's really talking about like chasing the ghost of the X-Files, which is really all about his struggle to let go of his sister. Well,
it's born of the fact that this experience with his sister being abducted and when he was a kid. So yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, Trace.
It's metaphor.
Sorry, Jesus Christ.
No, let's move on. So Father Joe leads Mulder and the others to a burial site, and they find a frozen body under the ice. And this is the second instance where we get another crosscut. And this one I actually think is almost more effective than the first one, because you're not sure if they're happening in the same spot at the same time. But actually, Yonka, the Callum Keith Rennie character, he is approaching that same site, but he's at the top of the hill. So the
shot's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like the overhead shot of like him looking at all of them, like discovering the body, what's essentially a tomb, or not a tomb, but like a bone graveyard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it makes good use of this idea that, like, this is a winter horror film, which is something that we rarely see. Yeah. So there's just constantly people having to navigate the elements and being like, shit, this isn't just like a pit of bones like what we see in, what is it, House of Wax?
It's so clever. I mean, like, how many times have we seen people say, I wish a Friday the 13th film was set in the snow?
Exactly.
Well, had this been rated R, this would have been...
So what you're saying is you want more Jason in this.
Let it go. I think you just wanted this to be a different movie. You're going to have to let that go.
Hey, I gave this a 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd. I actually do think this movie's fine. I like this movie.
Okay, let's move on. Yeah. I'm like, no, okay. So, back at work, Scully continues to butt heads with her superior. I'm not even going to read that part.
Yeah, that's enough. That's enough about that.
Yeah. Let's get to the good stuff. So Mulder calls her to let her know that they've recovered 11 different body parts from the ice. And Father Joe zeroes in, and they acknowledge that, there's a second victim, and they trace her back to the pool. I love random extras in movies, and the guy who's operating the desk at the pool, and just how completely unhelpful he is. Definitely.
And like the accent too was a choice. Like, he was just doing his own thing. He was really excited to have this part.
He was like, I am going to get into the Actors Guild with this motherfucker.
It was so bizarre though. Like, I don't...
No, I loved it. That's actually... But again, that's very X-Files too. They had that happen a lot. They had like these random ass things that would happen. Again, probably more so on like the episodes that leaned into the humor more. But things like that, I could see them feeling just really random and out of place to people who who haven't watched the show.
It's true. The part where they're like, do you keep a log? And he's like, of course. And then they're like, can we see it?
He's like, I threw it away.
I did it yesterday.
Okay, no. Literally, no. When they asked him for a log, I was like, y'all, he's like a bumfuck natatorium owner in West Virginia. No, he doesn't keep a log, but he did.
But then he threw it away. He's like, oh yeah, I threw that one away. The one from yesterday.
It's funny too, because it's like a derivation of all of those terrible other movies where they go in, they're like, do you have a security camera? And they're like, yeah, I got it. Oh shoot, it's the same tape I just taped over yesterday.
With my stories.
Yeah. With my soaps. So Scully decides a Christian should undergo stem cell treatment. Fuck. Okay. Mulder realizes both women had medical ID tags, and Scully connects it to organ transplants. Hey, we're making progress.
Yep.
And Mulder calls her he basically wants her to come back and work the case with him, but she refuses because she doesn't want to be part of this darkness anymore. So,
which, again, she was the one who invited him into this shit.
And she regrets it.
Well, because she wanted him to do something with his life, not be a bum and, grow his beard out or whatever.
Oh, you mean with that fake-ass, high school theater beard?
Dude, be careful to throw, stones in glass houses.
Okay.
Not you, Ari.
No, I know who you're talking about.
My beard?
I know what you're saying.
Hey, no.
Has that mustache connected to the rest of it yet?
No, my beard that I'm trying to grow right now is an actual beard growing out of my fucking face. The beard that is on him in this movie is not real.
David Duchovny literally can grow a beard, though.
Right, but he did not grow that beard, and it's fake.
What makes you think that?
I literally
Where
looked
are the
it up.
receipts?
I literally looked it up.
I literally looked it up, and it is not real. Even Duchovny complained about the fake beard because it made him itch too bad.
It doesn't even look that bad. I'm looking at it right now.
It looks not great.
Okay.
So
Fuck
Scully
you.
has...
No. My beard is fine. I'm trying, okay?
Oh my God.
It doesn't connect on the right. No, the left. I'm sorry. But it's fine.
You're trying as hard as this movie is trying.
Until your beard is perfect, you shut up about Mulder's beard. This is the beard America wants. This is the beard I want.
Anyway.
Okay, so basically this is like a breaking point. She doesn't know how she and Mulder can be together anymore because of this darkness. And this is also the point where she gets dealt a double blow because Christian's parents are like, we don't want you to do this treatment anymore. Okay, so Scully visits Father Joe, and this is when they have their big blow-up. And it's all over the fact that he quoted at her the previous day not to give up. Or he specifically says, don't give up. And she's like, what the fuck did you mean it?
It's so silly. It's so silly. It's like, bitch.
Oh my God, I loved
that.
it.
Could have meant anything. No, it's good. I like it. But this is the scene where he dresses her down, though. He's like, I get it. I'm a pedophile. But you're really judgy, bitch.
She is very judgy. Do we think that part of this is because she's projecting everything that she can't get angry at Mulder about onto him?
I think she's just mad at him because of the fact that she kind of needs him at this point, because she needs him to explain. This is like her whole thing is just like her cognitive dissonance over oh, this is what I believe, and this is like what's actually happening, and it's kind of going. This has been her whole thing, like the whole show.
Yeah,
it's like there's this other potential evidence that suggests that what I believe may not fully be correct or true, and that's like the black and white, and she gets grayed, and she's uncomfortable with that. That's like typical Scully.
So, what do y'all think about the movie's stance on not pedophilia, but like a pedophile? The movie does ask you to sympathize with him to an extent, and it's a dangerous territory to walk. I don't want to say that you should sympathize with a pedophile, but I do think that, and without any knowledge of the human brain, I do think that there's things to be learned from them. And this conversation of, because he even says, I didn't make me like this. And she's like, well, God certainly didn't. But that also bleeds into the queer lifestyle of we as queer people say, well, we don't choose to be like this. We are born like this. But then, super Christians are like, no, you do choose to be like that. God wouldn't make you like that. And coming from as a queer viewer, it's difficult to watch because A, not only am I like, oh, am I on the equivalent pages of a pedophile? B, are people equivocating me to a pedophile? C, is it that different? To be I'm born with these urges and I have to do them, So that's
a legitimate greater debate.
Yeah.
If you think of things like NAMBLA and the, men who love boys. And it's that's that people who identify under the queer umbrella. It's like, let's not equate us to that because it's not the same. But I will say, to respond to your questions is that, yeah, there are lots of people who would look at it as the
100%.
same and they fucking hate us for it. And, we're immoral and wrong and we're born wrong or we're choosing to be wrong, whatever the case is. So yeah, that's a really that's a really complex argument that I don't know that this movie was prepared to facilitate.
It's not, and I feel like it thinks it's handled in this scene.
But to be fair, it's handling it in I'm sure he didn't think twice about it. I also think about when this was probably written, it's not, I'm trying to think of how this conversation might look today. Oh, I don't even think actually
Yeah.
that wouldn't have been in it. That wouldn't have been in a movie, I don't think, to kind of make this character sympathetic in some
But
way.
that's not the fact that this movie included this part and got a wide release in the summer of 2008 is still kind of mind-boggling to me.
I think, Ari, you're right that at the end of the day, the reason that this is in here is because Chris Carter wanted to use something that could contrast Scully's storyline, right? Like, he wanted to have something that he could really explode and kind of crack open the dilemma that she's having. And what could be better than a conflicted, member of the church, right? Because it really underlines all of her religious ideology that's kind of unraveling in the case of this child. I also don't think that Chris Carter thought carefully about the way that he was going about this character or this character's connection to homosexual villains that really harken back to the way that we've seen villains portrayed since the 70s and 80s.
Would we call him homosexual?
Him? I mean, well, he is, because he's attracted to boys. They specifically say that it was boys that he was going after. But in the scope of the film, he's almost desexualized. Like, they make a specific mention that he self-castrated or self-castrated himself.
So no, anyway, just to throw a little education at you. So the term homosexuality too was used for a very long time as like a mental health diagnosis, like a mental illness diagnosis, and that's why it's not really in vogue anymore. And took a while for that to go away. So I mean, if you're talking, no one knows how this priest sexually identifies because he's castrated himself, and that's not really the focus. Like, it doesn't matter as far as I'm concerned. Like,
but don't you think that people will watch this movie and associate that with homosexuality?
I think 100%, yeah, because of the way that the film handles it.
Yeah, I mean, but again, I think your question is kind of like, what's the point of, what does it matter if people are going to think, it's perception about it. It doesn't matter what we call him. It's like people are going to be associating it with this awful thing anyway.
Yeah. Right. If anything, the film leans on, it uses the stereotype as a bit of a shorthand to cheat, to say, here's a bit of background that will help you to understand why this character is interacting with Scully in this way. So it's like, all I had to do is say pedophile priest, and I can play to all of your worst fears and nightmares about how boys have been sexually molested in the church.
Well, I think that's kind of my thing, though, is I actually appreciate the questions this movie is raising.
It's just that it lacks the capacity to actually address them in a meaningful way, which is why this film, in a way, is so dangerous. And I don't say that lightly. I know that I often sound hysterical on the show.
It asks a lot of the viewer. And if the viewer is, I'm trying to find the right way to say this,
not thoughtful or not open to, like, having a nuanced conversation,
right? Then like we see with any example of pedophilia in the real world, and again, talking about pedophilia in any shape, way, or form is going to bring out very strong opinions in people, rightfully so. And I fully agree with that.
But I think, unfortunately, a lot of people will still just automatically be like, oh, pedophilia equals gay.
That's what I thought you were talking about, Trace, not about, like, the debate around,
it's both. It's both, to be honest. It's
both. But those are two really different, I think those are really different debates.
But there's still debates to be had.
Sure. No, I agree with that. Again, like, I don't know that I would call it, I don't know that a film like this could be so dangerous just because of the context around it. It's different whenever, if it's like a politically oriented film or something that was like kind of like, that was what it was. That was like the main purpose of the movie, is to kind of make a statement about something. And the thing is that I just think it's kind of like fumbled around so much that it never really makes a statement. It just, at most, it's just like kind of like ignorantly problematic without realizing it. And I don't necessarily think that they realized it. I think that Chris Carter, and Spotnitz were just like, let's just, sure, like, let's give them this conflict because it makes sense for our Catholic protagonists, and let's, and this is a thing that people know about priests and, sexual assault of children, and, so.
We like to cut slack, though, because of time periods, but it's like, this is 2008, and it's just 11 years ago. It's still a different time.
What was different? But I'm curious, like, I've kind of thought about that. What do you think was different with respect to, like, the conversation about pedophilia?
Well, not pedophilia maybe per se, but you mean just homosexuality or queerness in general. Also, the movie points it out when they fucking pan to George W. Bush and they play the X-Files theme when they pan to the picture.
Well, and don't forget that they've got him, but then they've also got J. Edgar Hoover, who is a noted crossdresser and who many people think was a closeted homosexual. Okay, so at this point, the debate is settled, more or less, because she goes to leave, and then he has a seizure. So, and of course, our cue that he is connected to these criminals in some way, which is something that Fox Mulder has hinted at earlier, is that we also see a body seizing where the kidnapped women are being held. So they're like physically connected.
Which is never really answered.
No, it's only hinted at.
Yeah. It's answered as much as that X-Files answers lots of things like that.
It's really frustrating.
Well, it leaves you to make up your own mind by saying like, hey, if you can visually connect these two things, then you should be able to figure it out.
Well, you know what? Y'all can go watch Prometheus and deal with those questions.
It's
and
not that dissimilar in that way. Yeah,
it's not. No, like Chris Carter and Damon Lindelof need to go like have a date.
I think that like you just don't like things not being explicitly said to you. Like you don't like having to think extra about things. I
don't mind that. I'm just saying that it's frustrating when the movie is like asking these questions, and I get leading up to the viewer to be like, hey, what do you think about this? But it's almost pretentious in a way.
I think it's also because we have a personal stake in this. Like, I doubt, like, okay, so one of the things, when I was looking up research for this film, I was intrigued to see if people they comment on the pedophilia angle because it's a very explicitly stated thing and it's a topic of conversation.
Yeah.
The homosexuality of the villains and the connection to the pedophilic priest is not something that comes up, nor is the fact that there's like a normalization of heterosexual romance at the end of this film that basically necessitates every queer character dying, as well as Amanda Peet, who is a threatening adulterous persona. So basically we have to kill everybody who threatens Mulder and Scully's normal relationship in this movie so we can get a happy ending. And nobody says anything about that in any of the reviews.
Yes. Let's continue this plot summary because I really want to talk about the trans issues.
Yeah. Okay. So at this point, this is where we figure out who these men are. So they are Russian emigres. The main guy who has done the abductions is Callum Keith Rennie. His character's name is Yanka. And he's married to Franz, who is played by Fagin Woodcock. Real name, unfortunate. And at this point, it's revealed that he's one of Father Joe's 37 molestation victims. So they trace Yanka back to the office building, and they find Monica Bannon's decapitated head in the organ transplant bag, and Whitney and Mulder chase Yanka around an abandoned construction site, and Whitney is then pushed to her death.
Now, I will say, as much as I hate Amanda Peet dying in this movie, I think this sequence is very well done.
Oh, it's good. I really like it.
There's a shot where she's looking up at him through the elevator levels, and she's like, I can't find him. And then she looks back, and he's right there.
It's very, like, slashery. I really like that.
It really is.
And I was really shocked, though, because I remember her falling down. I remember seeing her face as she falls down.
She falls for a long time.
A long time. And then they show her get impaled by, like, the rebar on the bottom, which I did not remember. Nope. And I was like, this is quite brutal for this type of movie. So I was happy about it, but also upset because I was like, wait, so we're left with Exhibit?
This is how you know we're gay. We're like, no, get rid of Exhibit. Keep Amanda Peet around.
Listeners, Amanda Peet is really, really talented. If you've never seen the HBO show Togetherness, you should watch it. It's amazing.
So this is when we find out that Father Joe has terminal cancer. So that's part of what the seizure is a response to. And she decides that she's going to trick this sick man by asking him whether or not Monica Brannon is still alive. He says yes. Obviously, she is not.
Yeah, her head's in a bag.
Yeah. And Scully's like, well, case closed. Done and dusted. I'm going to walk away from this whole thing. Mulder's like, not so quickly. So this is also where we get our first glimpse of the trans issues in this film, because we see that Fran's severed arm, which is the one that was found earlier in the film that they keep talking about all the animal tranquilizers being in, we see that it has been replaced by a female arm because he has lovely painted
it's
nails
Brandon's
now.
arm, right? It's Monica Brandon's arm?
Yes.
No, it's whoever the first woman was, right?
Yeah, Monica Brandon.
Yeah, Monica Brennan is the FBI agent whose head is found, and then the
From
other
the first
woman
scene.
is Cheryl.
Yeah.
So Cheryl is our final girl who narrowly avoids getting decapitated at the end.
So we have this ex-altar boy who was raped by his priest, who is now gay, who is having his head or body...
he's having his head transplanted onto another body because he is also terminally ill.
Right, but it's always a woman's body.
No,
Yeah,
that's the thing, though. That's the thing is that, like, whenever they discover all the body parts, they say that it's men and women's. And this is apparently something that's been happening for a long time, that they've just been, like, putting body parts.
True, but the only body we actually see him on is a woman's body.
Well, my only question is this, because I raised this point too, whenever Ari and I discussed it last night, because I was like, it's a woman's body now, but yeah, it has been various sexes before. However, the first scene, we see this man attack this woman. So it hasn't been going on for that long.
Well, she's the latest, and she's presumably like victim number 9 or 10 or 11.
Right, but in the first scene, he's on his own body. He's not on another body.
I don't know that's his own body. I don't know that we're meant to believe that.
So we're to believe, though, that he is attacking this woman with his head on someone else's body.
Well, yeah, because we do see the two-headed dog.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the whole point of this.
Okay,
is that people can live like this, but it's for like a limited amount of time.
I have to go back and look to see if there's like scars you can see. I don't know if there is.
That's not meant to be his like fresh body.
It's part of the problem with this film, right? Is that there's this lack of clarity, like
this. Yeah. So my kind of perspective on this, Joe, and then we had talked about this a while back about this movie particularly, is that like so I think the reason why they do show a woman's arm is so you know that, oh, that's not his body. Because if you showed another arm, like a man's arm or an arm without a painted nail or something like that, you might just think you're just looking at this man's
unless
body.
They showed like a stitch mark on his arm.
Right, or something like that. I'm just saying like that's the decision they made.
Right.
And so these decisions that they made, just the same way that there's kind of this like bumbling decision to kind of fall into this old stereotypical view of, oh, people who are boys who are molested. Yeah, okay, well then
they grow up to be gay,
he's going to be gay later, and he's fucked up in the head. And so I think that the problem in it lies in not giving it due diligence, like just kind of also
skirting
because nothing is really that well explained about this. Like nothing's really explained about how long this has been happening, like what the process is like. It's all very like kind of, look, this thing is happening and it's to keep this killer alive, and they're doing it for love and whatever the case is that it leaves the audience to kind of fill in the blanks, and the audience will fill in the blank in the easiest way possible. And it's like, oh yeah, of course, like if someone is not into queer issues and they don't know about how problematic that can be, they're going to be like, yeah, of course, because all boys who are molested end up most likely being gay.
Well, that's the biggest problem though with this movie potentially, is that like, yeah, that's the thing. They're not only going to grow up to be gay, but they're going to grow up to be psychotic murderers.
Yeah, that they're disturbed. So
yeah,
I think like that's where the problem comes in, is that the idea of like, because there's such a lack of explanation, leaving it up for people to explain it, is that you're gonna pick this really kind of fucked up belief system or set of beliefs and apply it to these characters, because that's kind of how society has viewed things. It's like, look, like the idea of like a man's head on a woman's body, that is so grotesque or it's so bizarre or whatever. Oh, look, the idea, kind of like it's throwing it out there for people to make sense of, and people are more likely to make sense of it in a very problematic way.
That's what I would argue, is that the R rating would become more handy, is that you could address this in a more explicit way, because honestly, you can't get away with this premise without addressing some explicit issues.
I don't entirely agree with that, because so one of the things that comes up in a lot of the reviews is and I myself did, is they call these people Russian mad scientists, or they say, oh, they're creating like a Frankenstein's body. So it's not as though they couldn't have done this in a way that made it very clear that he's just stitched together with a different thing, with different bodies. Like, whether or not it was intentional or it was a visual shorthand to be like, look, it's a male head on a female body, the decision was made. Like, they could have gone with a person of a different ethnicity to help clarify that. They could have had stitches. Like, at the end of the day, there's a lack of insight and a lack of awareness that this could have been problematic, which I do think that it wasn't. I don't think that it was done purposely.
No, it's like anything else, that in that time frame, these issues were not as at the forefront, and the idea of something being problematic was not even in, the discourse, public discourse around these issues.
I just worry that there's one other thing too, which is this idea that people could say, oh, well, of course they're going to put his head on a lady's body because that way then we can have a man and a woman together. Like, I think that's the final step of ignorance that people could potentially take away from this, which is that, oh, queer couples just want to be male and female.
I think that's maybe a little bit of a leap. I don't think they're going to go into it thinking that they're going to have to think that much about the reason.
Well, I don't think they're walking into this movie thinking that this is what they're going to get.
Right.
Like, I don't think anyone's walking into this movie saying, like, oh, we're going to get, like, this formerly raped altar boy murdering people and, like, trying to transplant his head on a woman's body. It's frustrating, I guess. Like, I understand the conversations that Carter and, Spotnitz?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're trying to have with this movie. But it's so undeveloped, and even with the revelations of what happens, because even, like, again, Skinner, who is Mitch Pileggi,
Daddy,
it's anticlimactic, and you get this whole thing where it's like, oh, well, we gotta save Mulder. Really cool shots of the girl almost being decapitated, but then not, because she's, like, in a bath of ice, and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of good ingredients here that don't really pan out the way that I think they were intended to. But I think it's the like a fight between the action and the thematic whatever that Chris Carter was trying to go for in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, this is the part of the film where I think it really starts to go off the rails because we're now into, like, the meat, the action of it. Mulder's in danger. He's almost getting hit with an axe. We've got to save this woman who's in this ice bath. There's, like, a two-headed dog running around
should
mauling
be really
people.
exciting.
It should, and it's not bad, but it all feels very quick and almost too easy. Like, Mulder gets out of the snowbank after Yanka drives him over the cliff. He follows it back. He's right there at this compound where they're doing experiments. It's like the grossest mad scientist laboratory you've ever been to with terrible lighting.
Yeah. So, Joe, you have mentioned though this entire thing being like a transphobic issue.
Well, I have concerns that people could misinterpret.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we were just talking about, though.
No, it is. And listeners, I actually, like, I would like to throw this out to you, I mean, like, do you find this transphobic? Do you find this irresponsible in any way? There's no right or wrong answer, because we've discussed it a little bit, and we might discuss it more, but it's tricky.
Well, I think you have to, I think context too, like, no one would even think about transphobia when you're looking at, like, a mainstream movie like this back then, meaning,
which is
like,
why I almost commend it for doing what it's trying to do. Although, again, what it's trying to do, I don't know if it's what I think it's trying to do.
Well, it handles it with, like, all thumbs. Like, it doesn't know how to handle it, and it handles it in a way that ends up being pretty problematic and, like, kind of, again, the idea of, a man's head on a woman's body, that's grotesque, and it's the idea. And again, it's not something that I think that was very well thought through, because also those people they're privileged. They're probably so removed from the idea of actually, they probably don't know any trans people also. So not understanding, like, what that could look like to people.
Do y'all think Chris Carter knows a trans person?
I don't think anyone who could write something like this knows a trans person. But the thing is, what I'm thinking is, like, with a lot of these films, like, you just think about, like, even dialogue in some TV shows 10 years ago, people were making these kind of problematic jokes, and there was like 30 Rock. I rewatched 30 Rock recently, and I love 30 Rock, and there's a lot of transphobic jokes in there, and a lot of just, like, they handle race really poorly, and again, like, it's this whole idea that it's not really excusable.
But it is a different time period.
But but it was a different time when these things were not as at the forefront, and I'm glad that people do care about these things now, and that does keep things from, getting patronized or, you know, by people who recognize, hey, that's a problem. I don't want to watch that, or I don't want to be a part of this. So yeah, I think it's kind of unfair because we could like go back a little bit and attack lots of things from the 90s and the 2000s, there, you know, the aughts and
we do.
And you can, and I think you should, because I think it speaks to like, you know, where society was in a lot of these time periods where such things were so normalized that people, their excuse is like, it was a different time. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, but isn't that fucked up that that's how things were? You know, isn't that shitty?
Yeah. That's why it's important to like note those things though, so you can show people like, yeah, this is what it was like back then. Look how good it is now. And even then, it's not
how good it is.
Great.
It's not great.
Hey, how good it is in quotes. But I mean, I look at millennials now. I'm sorry, that's the wrong term, because I'm considered a millennial.
Yes, you're just say like
just
Gen
say
Z.
younger people.
Gen Z or iGen.
Gen
like
Z.
that's kind of
yeah,
what
Gen Z or iGen.
research.
Like it's like they have it a lot better than we did. You know, like I see people coming out at the age of like 12, and I'm like, oh, must be nice.
That doesn't necessarily mean that they have it better.
No,
I mean,
but they have the confidence to do that at that young of an age, you know.
Well, I think that there's also more of a discussion around something that was so taboo before, that like people wouldn't even talk about it. Like growing up in, you know, BFE West Texas, like people didn't talk about that stuff because it was just like so othered, that now when there is a conversation around it and there is space kind of being made for that, sure, that like maybe will help people come out earlier, but I don't know that doesn't necessarily make it any easier.
Yeah. And I think part of what ends up happening with this film too is that we don't get any kind of closure to it either. So not only are these two men, like we get a very brief scene where Yanka holds Franz's hand earlier in the film, but that's like the only genuine moment of intimacy that we see between these two men.
That's the shitty thing, is like, yeah, we're told, oh, they're gay, but we don't get to see a lot of love.
No, like they're not characters.
No, nothing is humanized between them at all. If anything, it's like they're monsters.
And then at the end of the day, what ends up happening is we just, you know, like Franz doesn't get his surgery because they rescue Cheryl in time.
Mm-hmm.
And he wakes up with a head in a box.
Yeah, and presumably he would die because he needs...
Well, yeah, because when he dies, that's when Father Joe dies.
Yeah, so basically that's how this movie ends, is that as soon as Scully saves Mulder and... we cut, and it's, you know, everything has been resolved. Like there's nothing further to be said about the events that happened there. We learned that Father Joe, he's never seen again. He has died at the same time as Franz. Exhibit is never seen again at this point. He is presumably off working.
But more importantly, Exhibit is never seen again.
Exhibit is never seen again.
And Amanda P is dead on a fucking rebar.
Yeah, like there isn't even like a funeral scene for her. No, it's basically the Mulder and Scully show.
When she dies, Scully's like, "I'm so sorry that happened to you."
I mean, she didn't know her. Let's be real, she didn't know her that well.
They all knew each other fine.
They knew each other for like 2 days.
The only time that Scully saw Amanda Pete's character is when Amanda Pete was like, "Hey, Mulder, did you cut yourself shaving? Let me touch your neck like I want to have sex with you." So Scully was probably like, "Yeah, that bitch is dead. She can fuck off, you my man."
You're totally right. It's so fucked up. And that whole scene, I was like, wait, why? Why are they doing this? It makes no sense. But yeah, it's Mulder jealousy. That's what it is.
Joe, I do want to say real quick that I do, like, again, when I watched it yesterday, I remember finding it pretty problematic just because of the demonizing queer men and making them the monsters and never care, you know, and also kind of being torn. I was going through my own, you know, Scully crisis of like cognitive dissonance of like, well, okay, well, it's also a show that, like, I don't ever think that anyone's intention behind it is to be this way, but it's like, but now it is this way. Like, that's how I would see it. And had I seen it then, I probably, you know, in theaters, I would have never thought twice about any of this. And now we are having a conversation about it. So I just think it's important to highlight, like, my point earlier was not to, like, dismiss anything, because I do think that these are things that are problematic and that merit a conversation, which is why your podcast exists and why I think that it's great to be doing this.
Well, I think, yeah, if you're casually watching, to be honest, I think this is the kind of film where you could just very easily gloss over it. Like, I think a lot of people were like, oh, okay, there's the two men are gay. But I think even nowadays, there's probably a bunch of people who would say, oh, the villains just happen to be gay. You know, maybe not even understanding that there's a historical legacy of making queer villains, but then also tying it problematically to that pedophilia. And also then, you know, this movie ending with really a celebration of heterosexual love that has had to overcome, like, we need to get rid of these gays so that we can live together.
But also, though, that this pedophile basically tells off Scully, and not that he wins, because he dies, but he's almost validated by...
Well, I mean, he wins because he's, like, right, you know? Like, everything he said was correct.
Exactly. And the movie doesn't address the connection between him and the victims.
Correct as in, like, everything that he's, you know, like...
Well, yeah.
Like, his you know, seeing the...
But it's like, oh, he's saying, I'm seeing these things, and Scully's like, no, you're not. And then the movie's like, oh, no, it actually, everything he's seeing is really happening.
But the reason that he's seeing it is because, like, if you want to go to a really dark place, you say the reason that he's seeing these things is because of that one line that Mulder says early in the film, like, why are you having these visions? It's because the psychic is usually connected to the person. So you could take that as an insinuation that because he fucked this boy, that is how they are connected, and that is why they die at the same time.
And I would think I would read that, I guess, a little differently, because that's one thing that bothers me less, the connection thing, because it's more like being haunted by it. It's like what he's seeing is not stuff that's like pleasant.
That's fair.
He's seeing like people's body parts and shit, and people die, which is like kind of like, yeah, you know, you could be like, yeah, well, you should be living with that.
I'll be interested to see how people relate to the various arguments that we've been having for the last hour and 40 minutes, right? Like, will it ring true to people, or will they look at it and say, you know, I don't connect to it that way. I didn't see it as problematically. But I do wonder if there's people who are going to say, you know what, I was raised religious and this speaks to my experience, or I have heard these kinds of stories. Mm-hmm. Or are they going to say, you know, this is a common story that we see around the supernatural stuff with psychics and that kind of stuff. Like, I think there's lots of different ways to take it.
I think so too. And I think, like, to make an assumption that anyone is going to be like outraged by this altogether, or everyone's going to be like, you're reading into it too much. I didn't connect with it that way. Cause you'll see, like, in lots of films that maybe some people might find problematic with respect to, like, queer men or trans women or whatever, people of color, there are some people who identify as part of those communities who sometimes are like, this didn't bother me. You know, it didn't bother me the way that it bothers some other people who are writing about it. And that's just going to be like the variation in responses in general. I don't think that this type of, the way things are presented in this movie are so outlandishly offensive that they would merit like an immediate knee-jerk response from, you know, an entire community per se in the same way. But yeah, I agree with you that I think I'm curious to see how people who have seen this, what they have to say about it. Because again, like, I've had, you know, a connection to like religion, very strong connection to religion growing up, and like have had people in my life who have, you know, dealt with sexual assault of this very nature and a very similar nature. So yeah, I mean, I think like how we talk about this is always informed by our experiences to a degree, and kind of how we deal with those experiences personally.
Yeah. Because we've seen the narrative, particularly around The Silence of the Lambs, really change over, like the 25 years that it's been out. And I feel like people now look at it and the rose-colored glasses have really come off in terms of its depiction of a trans villain. And I'm not suggesting that this is necessarily on par, but I do think it's kind of on the same line. And I'm curious to see whether or not people see that connection, or even if they feel like it's, I don't know. We've probably exhausted our arguments.
No, it's and the fact that you mentioned earlier in the episode is, you know, no critic mentioned this in their reviews, which is shocking Because I feel like if this movie came out today, they would.
Yeah, no, I don't think and unfortunately, I don't think it's shocking that this wasn't mentioned when this movie came out.
But it should have been. It should have been.
But yeah, because people in the mainstream critics weren't thinking about issues outside of what they're, what's familiar to them. No, of course they're not going to think about like, the homophobic implications or the transphobic implications of this, because a lot of people writing these reviews are not trans and not queer.
Which is why it's important to have queer people writing reviews.
That is the takeaway from the X-Files, I want to believe. Case study, Exhibit A. Let's get some more queer people doing some reviews of films.
I mean, I enjoyed this film just watching it, just to experience it as a standalone.
I do think that, like, watching it again last night, I was more struck by, like, how it's, like, competently made. Like, I remember thinking, like, oh, this is messy. Like, it's well filmed, it's well edited. Like, I really love, there's a couple scenes that I thought were great. So I actually gave it an extra half star on Letterboxd from where I had before, because I did appreciate those things more. And, yeah, I mean, as a big fan of the show, it did give me, like, a little more juice to think, to kind of think about this in a different way.
All right, well, let's do a quick game and then we'll shut this down. So our game is a little bit more lighthearted because I feel like we've had some really heavy conversation here.
Thank you so much for that.
So just thinking about the X-Files as a brand and this film as an extension of a television show, I would like to hear from the two of you. What is a television show that you would like to see adapted to the big screen as a horror movie? And you can't say Fantasy Island because we already know that's coming.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Why the fuck would you even ask?
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, but okay, I guess I'll think of something else. I would say, okay, I guess this isn't really horror, and I guess we already kind of got this.
That's fine.
But I love Mindhunter, and I think it's so fucking creepy, but again, it's like, I love it because it reminds me of Zodiac.
Babe, I literally thought you were talking about the Rennie Harlan movie Mindhunters.
Ew, be quiet. He had too much whiskey, you can already tell.
Just a little bit. Trace, you're going to be like, oh, wow, there's a lot of slur in these last, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Wait, is it that obvious?
It's pretty obvious, but...
You're sloppy.
Fuck. I'm sorry.
Get your life together.
Let's see. My option, what would I go with? To be honest, I think it would be interesting, just thinking about your comment earlier, Trace, about Lindelof, I think it would be interesting to revisit Lost with a bit more of the horror elements on the big screen. I don't think it'll ever happen because I think, well, Lindelof has had such a terrible experience with it, he probably never wants to revisit it, but that would be a hard cast to get back together. Trace, can we count on you to do the housekeeping?
Yes. Before we announce what we're covering next week, Ari, do you want to plug away?
Sure, I will be plugging my 2 social media pages, 3 that are mildly inactive. So if you want to find me, you can find me at Ari Drew, ARI Drew. That's my username at Twitter, Instagram, and then I have a Facebook page. And then I'm sure some of you maybe already know me under my real
your
real
authentic
guys.
Name. Not your nom de plume.
Yeah, I usually, whenever I do any kind of coverage, that's where I post stuff. And if I do anything creative, that's where it goes as well. So definitely connect with me. I like to connect with new folks.
And you should connect with him because he's super hot and super amazing.
Oh, thank you. That is very sweet.
So sweet.
Well, thank the whiskey for that. That's great. I like it.
No, fuck you. No.
And we're back.
That's love, y'all. That's love.
No, that's not the whiskey's fault. I'm sorry.
Oh, I did. So I did want to plug something. I forget that, so I've been on a few podcasts recently. So
oh, good.
I did want to plug them because I've had a lot of fun doing this, and this is kind of like, I think what I enjoy doing now. But one was Consequence of Sound's relevant content podcast, which I had we talked about Taylor Swift, and it was really fun.
Cool.
So there's a connection there. So I did that, and that was a lot of fun, and you can find that link on my Twitter. And then I was a guest on my best friend's podcast. I think it was last Thanksgiving, so it's the year anniversary. Heavy Friending, which is a really funny comedy podcast. So check out both of those. Those are good listens.
Actually, if y'all have never listened to Heavy Friending, it's really fucking good. It's basically two non-friends who become friends on a podcast, and it's super hilarious.
Yeah, it's really funny.
Interesting. All right. Well, Trace, when you're editing this, maybe you can link in the show notes.
I will. No, I totally will.
Cool.
But if you want to reach me on Twitter, you can reach me at Trace Thurman.
And I am at B Stole My Remote. That's the letter B.
And if you're tweeting about the podcast, please be sure to use the hashtag HorrorQueers and email us at I'm so drunk.
Jesus Christ.
You almost got it. You're almost there.
The fuck? Email us at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Is that what it is? I don't even know what it is. I'm just making things up.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm also going to say right now that I do want to come back for an episode that's going to be fun, because this was really heavy shit, and I feel like everyone's going to think I'm like this like downer person.
Here's the thing, Ari. I apologize. This was quite a bit heavier than I think even I anticipated. I do sincerely want to thank you, not only for coming on our 50th episode, but also because I think you brought a really great levity and a really great informed analytical approach to
thank
this.
you.
What are we doing next week, Joe?
Next week, as we enter into the final weeks of the year, we are going to tackle some really heavy content, Trace. We are tackling Blade Trinity, folks. So it's going to be a thirst episode where I just oogle Ryan Reynolds' body.
You picked this episode. Why did you pick this movie?
It's an anniversary, isn't it?
No, actually, maybe. You know what? Tune in to find out.
Yeah. So we're gonna check out Ryan Reynolds and his hot body on the film's 15th anniversary.
Have you watched the movie recently?
I have not. I don't think I've watched this since it came out on video. I remember it being a hot fucking mess, but I remember that Parker Posey is in it. The guy from Prison Break is the villain. Callum Keith Rennie, who I enjoy and hopefully will enjoy more in this film than in I Want to Believe. But yeah, mostly I'm just looking forward to Jessica Biel with her Apple iPod earbuds kicking ass.
You know I love Jessica Biel.
This is not her best movie.
No, it's really bad. She's given the worst dialogue you can ever imagine. It's terrible. It's so bad. Stay tuned next week for this episode.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps it up. That's your cue, Trace.
Yep, I think it will wrap it up as well.
Okay, so I guess we're done with our discussion for the X-Files I Want to Believe, and we will cross out horror queers.
And cross out X-Files I Want to Believe.
Oh my god.
Bloody Disgusting Podcast Network, home of creepy, disturbing, and terrifying creepypastas, SCP archives, weekly full cast storytelling, horror queers, genre commentary from an LGBTQ perspective, and the Boo Crew. For horror-centric interviews, listen free wherever you stream audio and at bloodydisgusting.com/podcasts.
Get in, losers. This is the Lady Killers, a Feminine Rage podcast. I'm Jen.
I'm Sammy.
I'm Rocco.
And I'm May. Our podcast is a tribute to the female-identifying killers in horror and more.
Each episode will feature us, your Supreme Court of female murderers, discussing our favorite lady killers, from your Julias and Jennifers to your Carries and Christines.
We'll tell her story, decide if it's good for her horror, and answer the most important question of all: would we die for her?
Join us on Thursdays as we pull on our sweaters, snatch our ice picks, sharpen our scissors, and honor the lady killers who live on the silver screen.
No boys were harmed in the making of this podcast.
Yet.
It was late in the afternoon when the professor and I took our way towards the east, whence I knew Jonathan was coming.
Jonathan Harker has asked me to note this, as he says he is hardly equal to the task. and he wants an exact record kept.
Dear Madam Mina, I have read your husband's so wonderful diary. Strange and terrible as it is true. I will pledge my life on it.
God preserve my sanity, for to this I am reduced. Safety and the assurance of safety are things of the past.
I am in hopes that I shall see more of you at Castle Dracula.
Listen to Regarding Dracula wherever you listen to podcasts, or find us online at bloody.fm.